So how can we use the saved value to pre-populate the form? Well, we can also do that here in After Next Render before setting up that subscription, let's say. Here we can access local storage to read a value from it with getItem, and I then use the same key as before to read any value stored under that key. And that will be my saved form, of course, the saved form information. So in my case, it will be an object in this shape, though we'll actually get it as a string value here. So I actually need to parse that with JSON parse, like that. Now that could be undefined here though, and therefore what I'll actually do is I'll add a if check and check if saved form is truthy. So if I got some value from local storage, and in that case, I'll get my loaded form data, let's say, from JSON parse saved form. So that should now be an object in this shape here. So my saved email can be extracted from loadedFormData.email. And then we just need to update the form with that saved value. Well, and as it turns out, this form object that is set up by Angular does have methods that do allow you to change the values that are managed by those controls. Because this form object gives you a set value method, for example. And this does what the name implies. It sets the overall form value. Now, of course, you need to pass that new value to it. And here for the overall form, that would be an object that has an email key, which should be set to some value, and a password key that should be set to some value. And of course, the email should be set to the saved email. The password will be an empty string. Alternatively, if we only want to update one of these two fields, as it's the case here, we can also access our controls here, and then here the email control, and call setValue on that. And then I don't pass an object to it, but instead the saved email itself. So that would work as well if you don't want to update the entire form, but just one control. Now, if you save that, you'll get an error though, that you cannot read the properties of undefined when using setValue. And the problem here again is that whilst the template has been rendered here and the form object is initialized, the control objects actually aren't fully initialized yet. So trying to call setValue on one doesn't work, or trying to set those control values in general doesn't work. And the workaround here with the template-driven approach would be to use setTimeout to set a very short timeout of 1 millisecond to essentially just wait for one update tick that's performed behind the scenes, because then the form will be fully initialized. And we'll see a more elegant solution for this problem later once we deal with reactive forms. But here, this is a quick and easy workaround that does allow us to update the form now. So with this in place, you see the error is gone, and you see it was pre-populated here. And if I go to the application tab and I delete saved login form and I reload, you see it's not pre-populated. But if I now start typing here again, and then for some reason I stop typing like this and I reload, this state was saved and is pre-populated again. So that's now how this works. And of course, submitting also still works as before. And with that, we now added this nice extra feature. And along the way, you learned about more interesting form capabilities and features like value changes and like setValue, which are all provided by Angular because Angular is managing this form object for you. And as you can tell here, when using template-driven forms, it does all that for you with very little work from your side. All you do is register inputs in your template, and you did add the forms module. But that's then it. The rest is done by Angular. And therefore, template-driven forms are a nice way of setting up forms quick and easy without too much work. But they do come with certain downsides, like for example, this workaround, which we had to use here. And that's why now we'll move on to reactive forms, and we'll learn about this alternative way of creating and registering and using forms with Angular. So now that we learned about this template-driven forms approach, we'll move on to the reactive forms approach, which is that other main way of handling forms Angular gives you. Now, for that, I completely reset my login component, and you find the updated login component HTML and TypeScript files attached therefore, so that you can reset yours as well, because we will now handle this form again, but now using this reactive forms approach. And of course, later we will also move on to that sign up form, which is a bit more complex, because it's a longer form with more input elements. But for the basics, we'll start with this login component. So how do we now register and handle this form with the reactive forms approach? Well, one important difference is that unlike with the template-driven approach, we don't set up the form in the template. We will later connect the template elements to our form, but we don't register them here. We don't initialize the form with help of the template. Instead, we do that in our TypeScript code. And to do that, we simply go to our component that holds our form, so to the login component in this case, and there you can simply add a new property called form, or my form, whatever you want. The name does not matter. The value of this property does matter though, because that should be an object of type form group. And that is something that's imported from Angular Forms. And that is actually a class, and therefore you should instantiate a new instance of this form group class here. Because a form in Angular is in the end a form group object. And you saw that before with the template-driven forms approach as well. When we logged that form there, you saw that in the end it was an object of type form group. Now with the reactive forms approach, we create this form group object on our own. Now such a form group takes an object as an input, as an argument, and it's that object that now registers multiple key value pairs, where every key value pair represents one control inside of that form group or some nested form group. And I'll get back to nested form groups later. For the moment, let's focus on individual controls. So if I want to register an email control for my email input here, I could do that by adding a key named email, though that name also doesn't matter. It's totally up to you. But the type now must be a new form control. So for that, we import form control from Angular Forms and instantiate that. Now the form control constructor can be used without any arguments to set up a form control without any initial value or any other information. But you can, for example, also pass one argument to it to give that form control an initial value. For example, here to give it an initial empty value. And of course, we can now also add a second input here, a second control, the password form control, which also has an empty initial value. And with that, we created a form with the reactive forms approach, and we could now use that form. For example, I could add an onSubmit method, which currently is never triggered, but we'll take care of that soon. But I could add it, and in there I could reach out to my form and, for example, access the form value and then access the email control value here and use that. Though, of course, at the moment, that would always be that empty string, since at the moment we have a form with which we could work, but which is not connected to our template form here, to our markup at all. And that's therefore the next important setup step you need to go through when working with reactive forms. The first step is that you set up the form on your own in your TypeScript code. But the second step then is that you still need to let Angular know how this form is connected to your actual template, to your actual input elements in your markup. And that's what we'll do next.